Hello, we'll begin our program in just a few moments. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in. My name is Jeffrey Herbst, and I'd like to welcome you to another program in our series, Israel's Seven Front War, which we're doing in conjunction with our good friends at the Middle East Forum. Today, we'll have a very special conversation on Syria with Hadeel Oueis. But first, let me welcome you to AJU's Open Learning Platform. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we've sponsored hundreds of programs to entertain, educate, and inform you. We hope that you'll go to our website, www.aju.edu, often to see the exciting programs coming up. Next week, on June 17th, we'll have another in a series on Israel's seven-part war, this one focusing on Iraq. It's a pleasure today to welcome Hadeel Oueis to the program. Hadeel leads communications on behalf of the Center for Peace Communications, an advocate for liberal democracy in her native Syria during the historic uprising against Bashar Assad. She subsequently located to the United States. She serves as a reporter for the Saudi daily Al-Riyadh and now hosts biweekly programs on two leading independent networks in the region, Iraq's Al-Sharqiya and Yemen's AIC. She frequently appears as a commentator on some of the region's largest indigenous networks and the Arabic editions of BBC, Deutsche Welle, and Al-Hurra. Hadeel, welcome. So glad that you're with us today.
Thank you for having me, Jeffrey. I'm happy to be here.
Hadeel, focusing on Syria, which to some extent has kind of fallen off the radar of the media in light of Israel's war in Gaza and the like, but can you tell us the current status of the Assad government?
Yes, thank you, Jeffrey, again, and thank you for all the audiences who are watching us today. So the situation in Syria today, although Syria disappeared for the last few years from the news headlines, but the situation in Syria is not as stable as it may seem, since there is no media coverage about what's happening in Syria since the beginning of the Syrian uprising, and that became later a civil war. Syria became three parts. So not the entire country is under the control of the Assad regime right now. There is a part of Syria, which is northeast Syria, under the control of the Syrian Democratic Council, the Kurdish-led forces that are fighting ISIS with the support of the United States, and they have a little bit less than 1/3 of the country. So this is not under the control of Assad. And there is also northwest Syria, which is split between Turkey-backed militias control and other Islamist groups led by HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is a branch of Al-Qaeda. And of course, there is almost a little bit less than 2/3 of Syria under the control of the Assad regime. There is poverty, there is chaos, there is no security in all the area that's controlled by the Assad regime. But the Assad regime is in charge, but not alone, of course. He has many allies with him, making sure that the Syrian rebels, the Syrian opposition, won't come and take again more territory of Syria. And those allies are, of course, the Iran-backed militias, mainly Hezbollah, the Lebanese Hezbollah, but also Iraqi militias, some Afghani contractors, Shia Afghani contractors, who are all now in Syria.
Hadeel, that was an amazingly complicated and nuanced presentation, which we'll unpack. I'll be talking with Hadeel for about 15 minutes, and then we welcome questions from you, the audience. Please start submitting questions now through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and I'll get to as many as possible. Hadeel, for the part of Syria which the Assad regime controls, does it face any real opposition at this point?
It's hard to see people expressing their opposition in Assad control areas due to what I just mentioned. There are militias in the country. There is oppression. There is a very oppressing system in place in these areas. And there is also the very bad memories of the years of the civil war when Assad and Iran-backed militias, along with Russia, of course, killed thousands and thousands of civilians in a very long, bloody war because the Syrian people started the uprising, calling for democracy, calling for change. So people who lost families, lost beloved ones, they were also displaced. They lost people due to displacement. They are not daring to go against Assad publicly again. But of course, at least in social media, we see a lot of campaigns from the people in Assad controlled region expressing their frustration from Assad's failure to control the country or to take care of their even basic needs. Here, they are not asking for democracy anymore, but they are asking for a stable life, economic wise, and all of that. And all of that does not exist in Assad region. And what's also remarkable is that we see new groups of Syrians like the Alawites, the people who Assad belonged to, the group that Assad belonged to. They are also frustrated from the continuous decline uh, or the crisis that's becoming worse and worse every day for everyone, all the groups, all the communities in Syria. So people who did not want to join the uprising in the previous years, they understand today that Assad regime should go. There should be some sort of change in the country so things will improve because as some of the audience may know that there are still until today sanctions applied on Syria. And although some Arab countries, Arab governments reconciled with the Assad regime, restored diplomatic relations with Assad regime, but they are not willing to aid the Assad regime, his government, since Iran is still in the country and controlling very vital parts of Syria.
Yeah, let's get to that last point, which seems vital. How would you describe the relationship between Syria and Iran?
It's a beneficial relation, but it's key and it's important for Assad's survival. Assad, although, as I mentioned, he had relations now with some Arab countries, some governments around the world, but he trusts no one but Iran because his existence is very related to Iran's existence. And also for Iran, it's very important that the Assad continue to survive because now if we look at the Arab countries, as governments, the Assad regime is the only official Arab government that's opening the doors of his country to Iran without any limitations. Like, for example, in the Lebanese and Iraqi models, yes, there are militias that are close allies for the Iranian regime, but they are militias, they are not governments. While in Syria, there is this very close relation. But of course, Iran is not doing all of that for free for Assad. Iran is now controlling very important phosphate fields in Syria, some oil fields, some of the most important quarters and regions in the Syrian capital, Damascus, and all of that. Iran is taking it because they're telling Assad, we put a lot of blood and treasure in this war, and we want to be paid back. And because the government doesn't have any money, they are giving up parts of Syria and parts of the Syrian resources to Iran and, of course, to Russia as well.
Let's move now to Israel and Syria. How would you describe the current situation?
So Assad regime, due to his close relation with Iran, he is representing the Iranian position from Israel. Israel is an enemy for him. But what's happening in Syria today is very interesting because the Syrian people for very long time were oppressed by the Assad regime under the excuse that he is fighting Israel, and he is standing up for the Palestinians and the Palestinian issue. So the Syrian people had to say nothing, had to accept all the oppression, accept all the poverty, all the struggling by the Assad regime, the father and the son, because they are the defendants of the Ummah and defendants of the Arabs and Muslims from Israel. But over the years of the war, and because the Syrian people suffered a lot, lost a lot, on the hands of the Assad regime and his Iranian allies, they started to realize that Israel is not the enemy. The Assad regime is the enemy. The ones who killed the Syrian people are the enemies: Russia, Iran, and the Assad regime. And this is why we see now in Syria a big reaction on what the Syrians stand for a long time when it comes to how they view the relation with Israel. Actually, in one of the reports that we conducted recently in Jusur News, and it is an Arabic initiative launched by the Center for Peace Communications, we had a report from the ground from northwest Syria that's controlled by the Syrian opposition, and the people are frustrated from how Assad is trying to drag Syria into the conflict with Israel. And furthermore, they are frustrated that all the international media, even here the media in the United States, how all the focus is on Gaza, how the war in Gaza is being portrayed, all the exaggeration around what's happening in Gaza, while the media is ignoring the suffering of the Syrians. The media, in their opinion, the opinion of the people on the ground in northwest Syria, that is doing what Iran wants, doing what the Assad regime and similar governments want, which is put all the focus on the war in Gaza, put all the blame on Israel regarding what's happening in the Middle East, while ignoring very key and important conflict and big suffering for the people, like the one that's taking place and continue, by the way, to take place against the Syrian people by Iran-backed militias. They were even telling us that the international organizations, the UN-related organizations, stopped from giving them aid, stopped from delivering aid to areas in Syria that are much relied on the UN aid, because all the aid is directed into Gaza. And this is what part of the Syrian communities are feeling now toward what's happening in Gaza and the Israeli-Palestinian issue in general.
Do you think there'll be a war on Israel's northern front that will involve Lebanon, of course, but also Syria, as Israel's escalation with Hezbollah seems to continue?
Mhm. I think part of Iran's strategy now at this point, because Hamas is losing, is to try to push Hezbollah to involve Lebanon more in a conflict with Israel, which is, by the way, also something that a big majority of the Lebanese people refuse. They don't want war with Israel. They don't want Hezbollah to portray himself again like the Assad regime, the defender of the Palestinians, or the one who is in charge of this confrontation with Israel. They simply don't want to be in war with Israel. They simply don't think that their suffering is because of Israel. So I think Hezbollah is going to escalate more and more. And because unfortunately, for a very long time, Hezbollah was able to grow his capabilities, grow his political and military controlling capabilities on the borders of Israel. From the Syrian side, I think the Assad regime feeling toward Hamas has some differences if we compare it to Hezbollah, because Assad regime also think that Hamas aided some Islamist jihadist groups inside Syria against him. He accuses Hamas of having some ties with Al-Qaeda, for example, that rebelled against the Assad regime. So Assad is watching and he's happy to see this conflict. He wants both Hamas and Israel to lose more blood, to lose more time and more resources. So I don't think he's very willing to let Syria enter this war. But of course, the capabilities that Iran militias is building inside Syria on the long term is very dangerous for the security of Israel and for the US national interests.
Hadeel, we're getting a lot of questions, so let me go to those. And please, audience, please keep submitting them. We'll take your questions for the next 10 or 15 minutes. Hadeel, one member of the audience writes, what areas is the U.S. military operating in, and what are they doing? Because this is another area not much covered by the media.
Yes, of course, the media seems to want the American people to forget that the United States has troops in Syria and what the mission is. And of course, there are a couple of thousands of American troops in northeast Syria mainly. The mission is to be in the front lines, supporting SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, to ensure the defeat of ISIS, ensure that ISIS won't be back anymore. So the area is where the ISIS caliphate took place. This is the nature of the mission. Unfortunately, the US troops I don't see that they are in a safe position, because this mission maybe need to be more developed into also securing the area, not only from ISIS, but also from Iran militias, because Iran militias are also in the same area where the US troops are, but there is no activities against Iran-backed militias.
Another very interesting question from the audience. What's the source of income for the Assad regime?
Mhm. So Assad regime is making a lot of money from. Let's first talk about Syrians overseas. Syrian overseas are sending a lot of foreign currency to Syria, to their families, to the people they know inside Syria. Also, if a Syrian citizen now in Germany, let's say, wants to renew his passport, they have to pay something like $500, $600, if I'm not mistaken, but it's in this range. But of course, also one of the main sources of Assad's regime money right now, especially after the war, is drugs. And there were a lot of reports speaking about Assad and Hezbollah empire of drugs, the Kiptagon that is being manufactured today in Syria is smuggled to the entire world. Even here in the United States, some of these Kiptagon came to the United States through Hezbollah, who has ties with cartels in Latin America. So this is the main source, and there are a lot of reports about it in the news.
Another actor in the region, which an audience member highlights, is the role of Russia. And how would you describe its role in Syria?
Mhm. Yes, from Syria and through their intervention in Syria with the Assad regime, Russia was able to build a lot of political and military power in the Middle East and North Africa. And unfortunately, because Russia was not stopped in Syria, they were able to extend their influence to places in North Africa. They are now in Libya. They are now in other places in Africa, like Somalia, like Chad, many countries in Africa and the Middle East. And this is all started in Syria, because they think that they won the war in Syria, and they achieved their mission, which is helping Assad regime to survive. Assad was on the brink to fall and lose the leadership of Syria until Russia intervened. So through Syria, they were able also to gain the trust of many Arab governments, the the Arab governments saw that Russia stood up for its ally when Assad was about to fall. Russia intervened while some countries like Saudi Arabia, when they were targeted by the Houthis missiles, they think that the US did not do enough to help them during this conflict with the Houthis. So because of all of that, Russia now, despite also the war in Ukraine, they are still they still have a big influence and power in the region.
That's a very interesting point that they prove their credibility in Syria for the region as a whole. Hadeel, you've mentioned a name which many Americans hadn't heard of in quite some time, ISIS, which I think the American supposition was it's defeated and gone away. Is that not the case?
So I came from the area where ISIS emerged in northeast Syria, and I know the area very well and the what happened and what's happening today. And I think ISIS is an idea, and the idea still exists. It is still there in eastern Syria. It is still in Iraq. It is under pressure, under military pressure from the Syrian Democratic Council or from the Iraqi government, all of that with the support of the US. But ISIS as an idea needs a lot of work to defeat it. And unfortunately, this work is not being done. This is part of the things that we are trying to do in Jusur News and the Center for Peace Communications, advocate and speak about the positive things in the region, try to portray the good stories, try to speak about the good results for the communities when the communities are distancing themselves from extremist ideas from all sorts and types, whether it is anti-Semitism, whether it is Islamist, jihadist ideas. We are trying to do so, but there is still a lot of work that needed to be done, that we are able to defeat ISIS and prevent similar organizations to emerge from the region.
Hadeel, another member of the audience asks about the role and number and condition of Palestinians in Syria, and how would you describe that?
There is a sizable number of Palestinians in Syria, and the irony is that the Palestinians in Syria were massacred in many cities by the Assad regime and by Iran militias, because some of them, they are almost Syrians now. They've been living in Syria for a very long time, and some of them thought that the Assad regime should be changed, and they participated in 2011 uprising in Syria, and they were faced by Assad with the killing. Hundreds, if not thousands of them were killed by Assad and Iran militias, and there is a very popular picture that anyone can Google from Al-Yarmouk camp. Al-Yarmouk camp is a big area where all Palestinians live in Syria, and they were massacred by the Assad regime. They're still living in Syria. As I said, they are almost Syrians. They don't have the citizenship, but they are almost Syrian. But they were treated like many Syrians were treated by the Assad regime.
And you've painted an amazingly complicated and nuanced picture of what's going on in Syria. In terms of changing the dynamics at play, what would you say are the points of leverage for the United States and Israel?
You mean in Syria?
Yes.
I think the United States has a lot of leverage, a lot of tools to use in Syria. And the most important tool is maybe collaboration with the Syrian people. Big part of Syria and a lot of Syrian people wants change, wants peace in the region, even wants peace with Israel, and collaborating with them would be a great idea to preserve the U.S. Interests in Syria and in the region. But unfortunately, we saw that from the Democrats and Republicans, there is no big willingness to put a lot of diplomatic efforts to work on Syria, to work with the Syrian people. I totally understand also as an American that this Syrian case was a very complicated one and very frustrating one for the American governments because there is an uprising. There are people who are calling for democratic change, but also part of those who uh, participated in the uprising and represented the opposition in Syria were extremists, were affiliated with groups that are enemies for the United States, like Al-Qaeda. But of course, the good people are also there. We have to work more on looking for them, finding them, and try to find ways to collaborate with them on building a better future for Syrians, because a better future for Syrians would be a better future for the region. Leaving Syria like this to Al-Qaeda, to Assad regime, to Iran to grow its influence in it is going to be a big mistake.
Hadeel, you've mentioned Hezbollah several times, and there's a lot of fear about Israel's potential war in the north between Israel and Hezbollah. What's your perception of what Hezbollah actually wants?
I think the main goal for Hezbollah now is to cause casualties for the Israelis, to make Israel busy in the northern front, but also they have goals for Lebanon, for their role in Lebanon, and also their role in Syria and the entire region. They want to continue this conflict. They don't want to see peace with Israel. They don't want to see Saudi peace with Israel or Syrian or Lebanese peace with Israel, to continue this state of conflict that's benefiting them also inside Lebanon, because when they are portraying themselves as the heroes who are defending the region from Israel, while Israel is not doing anything for the Lebanese or the Syrian people, they will continue to be able to accuse anyone who opposes them inside Lebanon of being traitors and being against their own countries. I think they want this conflict to continue endlessly, and what to do to stop them is to contain their capabilities, contain their influence inside Lebanon. We should start inside Lebanon and contain their ability to have this big military presence. And from there, we can also prevent them from attacking Israel or causing all this chaos in the region.
Hadeel, final question. You also mentioned another name which Americans have not heard for a while, Al-Qaeda. Is it still operating, and is it growing in Syria?
It's not literally operating in Syria, but it exists. Al-Qaeda is another idea, extremist idea, and unfortunately, many people believe in it. And what encouraged many people to go back to Al-Qaeda ideas, to go back and feel that they have to join Al-Qaeda, they have to join an organization like this, is also the growing power of Iran militias, because Iran is a Shia group of Islam, and Al-Qaeda is the strong representative of the militant Sunni group of Islam. So the Sunnis who were killed by Iran militias, by Shia militias that came from all over the region to Syria, feel that they have to resort to a group that represent them.
Hadeel, I'm afraid we've run out of time. I hope we haven't lost you there. I'm afraid we've run out of time. I'd like to thank you There you are. Hadeel, I'd like to thank you. In a very short time, you've painted a very complicated and nuanced picture of what's going on in Syria and the region. This is, as we've discussed, an a area that's received not enough coverage, and we're really grateful. We've put in the chat some of your social media handles. I hope that the audience will continue to follow you. So Hadeel Oueis, thank you very much for joining us. And I'd like to thank you, the audience, for joining us in our 7-part series on Israel's multi-front war, which we're doing in conjunction with the Middle East Forum. Thank you for joining us this week. Next Monday at 11 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time, we'll be having another program, this time on Israel's war with Iraq. Hadeel, thank you so very much, and thank you to the audience for joining us also.
Thank you for having me, Jeffrey.
Only a pleasure. Thank you.